is the fourth video I'm recording today. A little tedious, but that's fine. It gets it done, and I've only got the weekend to do these, so I'm doing as many as I can on Saturday and Sunday. So again, we venture into the tales of Teksta, and we've talked about all of the founding ancestors that the goblins venerate. We've talked about the ancient past and the goings-on in the outside world. This time, let's work our way up to more recent events. For roughly 600 years, Teksta was peaceable, stable, and growing slowly from within. The towns grew into cities. The kobolds founded new warrens, which also grew in both population and influence. On rare occasions, some climbing or flying monster tried to invade, but was efficiently cut down by the small folk. The lands outside of the mountain were left untended. Their gates left open as generations of Gwens and Regina passed into memory. Far to the west, what was supposedly a fishing village on the sea coast was in the process of evacuating. The nearby ports of an elf kingdom had managed to identify the pirates who had been attacking their ships. Their ships were now on the horizon and getting closer. Surely they'd never expect their quarry to flee inland. Mostly halflings and goblins with a smattering of kobolds and an owlin packed in. Packed up their belongings, abandoned their town and fled due east with no clue what might lay in their path. They just ran in a straight line, families in tow, until they found a place to be. Maybe they'd reach the east coast, or a lake, or an inland sea. Even a river would be a blessing to them. Or a deep enough swamp to float something in. Unfortunately, geography wasn't in their favor. After more than 2 months, they were slogging along at barely a walking pace when they found a massive, ancient stone wall. An open gate beckoned them enter. Their leader was a youngish man, a goblin named Agalis Udescio. His mother, a retired pirate captain herself, was still rallied to by most of the previous generation, but she deferred to her son's decisions since her retirement, as was proper. Inside the gate, they found an empty stone building, large enough for all of them to camp in. They would be out of the weather for the first time in over a week. This group of surly sailors, landlocked as they were, searched through their environment for a few days before they found the mountain. It was past some scrub forests, rocks, and a brush field. Finding a graveyard hinted that there might be at least something to scavenge further along the path. Maybe there was an old castle or something up the mountain. Or even just a view of what lay beyond. They definitely weren't expecting a cave that opened into a lush, warm, green woodland. They also weren't expecting a Stone Age city. The locals quickly retrieved their leader, an old goblin woman in a carved wooden mask. She spoke eloquently and explained the nature of this place they'd found. Eventually, after a few meetings with a lot of old women, our pirates were offered a place to settle. A lake on the lowest terrace inside the mountain. A very deep lake. It was a few miles long and wide, and there they could sail again and fish. Granted, there were no merchant vessels for them to rob, commandeer, or sink, but at least it was water. So much water, in fact. All the rivers in the mountain led to this lake, including a waterfall roaring down over the clifftop. Agalis, at his mother's advice, started construction on a mill driven by a water wheel. Pelu, Agallus's mother, was appointed Gwen by the other women, and the town of Udescia Ford was born. And things settled in Teksta for a while longer. The farmers of Dapnomwick brought their grain to the lakeside mill to be ground. The large fish and other oddly out-of-place sea creatures were harvested and sold in markets all over the mountain. Agallus took a wife and had a son. This made his mother's appointment as Gwen official. As the young came of age, they served 2 years in the military before moving on to whatever trade, craft, or career they decided upon. As instituted hundreds of years before, this was called national service. A year of training, and then a year of station. Some few decided to stay in the army after their 2 years and became officers, training the next round of recruits. After another couple of decades, the Great Gwen and the Imperatrix were discussing a problem with population. It wouldn't be long before there weren't enough stations for all of the recruits in the army. Soon enough, they'd have to send people outside of the mountain to reestablish the borders at the old stone walls, probably within the next decade or two. Gazing out to the north, through their cave on the outside, the kobolds of Guano City saw a chase going on far in the distance, heading toward their own old stone walls. The sight struck them as odd. They'd never heard of or seen anyone outside of Teksta riding goats. In the failing light of evening, 2 bat riders and an erd were sent out to investigate. Before this section, I have to explain what a frost elf is. They're definitely elves, but they're also small creatures. They have light blue to white skin and hair, and they're immune to cold due to originally being from the deep Arctic. I have a stat block for them, and traits if anybody wants, just let me know. Now then, after a life of being adventurers, Corey Kelga and his wife Candy had tried several times to retire, more so after having children, but no matter the society they tried to settle in, they were driven out for one reason or another. Someone didn't like that Corey was a goblin, or someone didn't like that Candy was a frost elf, or someone didn't like mixed blood children, or they didn't like that his son-in-law was a half gnome and his grandson was of even more mixed blood. Or they didn't like that his sister had given birth to a barghest among her litter of children. It was always something. So they stayed together, they defended themselves, and they fled. They fled the frost elves, they fled the goblins, they fled the humans, the high elves, the hobgoblins, even the orcs wouldn't allow them to settle. They were chased from the forests, the plains, the mountains, forget about the cities altogether. They couldn't even settle in the swamps where Corey and his sister had grown up. Now another bunch of hobgoblins were chasing them because Corey had learned a skill set that they said belonged only to their Iron Shadows. Luckily, their daughters were quite adept at defending themselves, and the rest of their haphazard band weren't too shabby either. The goats they rode, some of which pulled their wagons, were a great boon. Candy's people had tamed mountain goats in the far north, and breeding them with the farm goats that humans raised let them at least keep pace with their pursuers' horses, though not entirely outrun them. Seeing a very old stone wall with an open gate ahead, they drove through it, and suddenly their pursuers stopped. They all wondered what they had just gotten themselves into, that a hobgoblin legion wouldn't take another step. Once all was again calm and the hobgoblins had left, they took stock of their situation. A few injuries, a few keepsakes and tools lost along their path, but most were intact. 1 1/2 1/4 gnomes, 1 2 1/2 1/4 elves, 8 4 1/2 goblins, and 1 bar guest. 15 people altogether. 4 wagons, 13 goats, and 9 piglets. They decided to camp the night in the big empty stone building just inside the gate, but they set watches and slept lightly, not yet trusting their apparent safety. It was several hours into darkness when something airborne, lit to the ground, a few dozen feet from the door of the building. Candy was on watch as a winged kobold in black armor landed. Then 2 really big bats with kobold riders glided down and landed beside the first visitor. With a sharp whistle, Candy woke the rest, and her husband was the first to reach the door. "You ride goats?" the Erd asked in perfect Goblin. "Who was chasing you?" He continued as he sat cross-legged on the ground, not coming any closer, nor making any threatening gestures. "Yes, we ride goats," Candy answered, also in Goblin. "We're chased because many don't like mixed blood." She continued, beginning to smile a little when she noticed one of the kobolds had a beak, and the Erd had feathers on his wings. "What is this place? Why wouldn't they follow us past the gate?" she then wondered. "This is our border," the Erd gestured towards the wall. "The outsiders called it a cursed land for centuries. We call it Teksta," he proudly pointed to the mountain. Once the situation was better explained and the travelers were granted a night's rest, and I was finished a really good can of tonic water, the travelers were granted a night's rest in the Mancio. They were guided by the Erd soldier through the wildlands, through the cemetery, up the mountain, and into Teksta proper. Their goats could be led through the caves, but the wagons had to be left behind. Having had several days to prepare, once they had heard the news, the great Gwen and the Imperatrix greeted the newcomers with much interest. They were especially interested in the goats. Being a grandmother and the eldest present, Candy, properly Incandesca Cori, was named Gwen when they were given land to settle. Cori, his sister Waro, her husband Uxin, and their children were ecstatic to discover there was a swamp available. So the collective group decided to take it. They named their new town Kelgalat, and the swamp Kelgamir. That covers all of the goblin towns. As far as the kobolds, on top of the odd features that showed through due to mixing with other egg layers, our kobolds seem to gain distinctive colorations over the centuries, tending to match the materials they mined. Salfolk, as they were called, who mined salt, were perfectly hale and healthy, but looked gaunt, pale, and sallow. Their scales took the hues of corroded metal. Those who mined tin had a dull sheen, almost waxy to their silvery gray scales. The guano kobolds had brown and white hues. Those who mined gems were multicolored with really vibrant shine. The strangest of all were perhaps those who dug the deepest and found tunnels far older than any they'd found before. These kobolds, through their generations, hatched more and more adept magic users of all kinds. They had more Urds, more sorcerers, more wizards. They even grew bigger horns and began to take on the colors of their larger dragon cousins, though they didn't grow any larger themselves. It was these kobolds who accidentally discovered a place where untold magics flowed chaotically. Monsters beyond description roamed freely. Spending too long in these deepest caves might even bring insanity. Perhaps they were getting too close to the decaying remains of the dead god who was buried beneath this mountain. So, we've now reached the point where player characters might be introduced. Would you play as a local? An explorer who just found this place? A settler being sent out to found a new town outside of the mountain? How about freshly trained soldiers being stationed to reestablish the borders and rebuild one of the Mancio? Or maybe a prospective merchant heading out into the world beyond, hoping to start trading with whatever neighboring kingdoms. If you're running a game, would you run it with battles where some army or monster is trying to attack the mountain? Or intrigue with conspiracies between the various Gwens and Reginas and all their advisors? See, now that's entirely up to you. So let me know what you want to see. Give me ideas. Tell me what stat blocks I should put together for you, and I'll put them in a video. Point out any mistakes I've made. I'm still open to anyone who wants to try anything. Anything I've described, anyway. Leave a comment about it or contact me through the email on my YouTube page. Like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you next time.